welcome back to our podcast.
This episode, we had Oklahoma Representative Andy Fugate on. Delmas, what did you enjoy about our discussion?
I really liked his unique perspective on the issue since he works in the state legislature as a representative. I also really liked what he had to say about education and how it affects the younger generation. What about you? What did you enjoy?
I agree. I also really liked the his unique position that he had, being in his profession, and we got to see really how misinformation and bias affects politics in general, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was awesome. And just so you guys are aware, Representative Fugate is a Democratic representative in the state of Oklahoma, and he may present some liberal views, and those views do not represent our organization as we are nonpartisan and we feature individuals for educational purposes only.
Enjoy our discussion. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So starting off, we were wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your educational background and then leading into your professional background.
All right. So I am a 1989 graduate of what was then Central State and is today University of Central Oklahoma. And my degree is in computer science with an emphasis in mathematics. And never something I expected to be involved with. Matter of fact, when I was in high school, I teased my friends who were involved with computers until I took my first computer class and said, oh, this is like playing. As far as my career, I've spent a little over 30 years in technology leadership for companies here in Oklahoma, property management, staff leasing, and then a run of not quite 20 years at the Oklahoman, where I led internet technology, mobile software development, enterprise projects, et cetera. So.
Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't realize that you were computer science. So, kind of with computer science and through your professional and educational background, did you ever learn about how to detect misinformation or learn about misinformation at all?
So the short answer is yes. The longer answer involves both my career as well as some stuff I've done on the side over the years. Let me start with the on the side stuff. So when I was in high school, I was involved in a program called Close Up, which was a trip to Washington, D.C., 200, 300 kids from the state of Oklahoma. And you're paired up with kids from another state, and you spend a week watching what goes on Capitol Hill close up, from the inside. And I didn't go when I was in high school because I was a politics junkie. As a matter of fact, about as far from that as you'd get. But I got there and I got hooked. And so I came home, and when I graduated from high school, a teacher of mine was involved with the state version of Close Up. And so from 1985 until my election in 2018, I spent every year a week of each spring working with high school kids at the state capitol, helping them understand, getting a close-up look at what was going on. And so we had a lot of opportunity over the years to help people spot misinformation and to help them find where the actual, I won't say truth, but where to look to inform themselves in productive ways. And some of that came from journalists along the way that were involved with the Close Up program. Most notably was Terry Watkins, who was a longtime investigative reporter in the state of Oklahoma. And Terry and I have become dear friends over the years. And when I was younger, she was instrumental in helping me understand the value of journalists. And then when I went to work at the Oklahoman in my professional career, I got to see firsthand the kinds of people call it spin or, there's a variety of terms for it. And there's a marked difference between how a journalist covers something, what they choose to cover, um, versus actual disinformation. And there's a whole lot of disinformation that exists today. But when I work with high school kids, the first thing I tell them is to take a long look um, at the bylines that they're reading, not just the sources, but who actually put this together and whose name it appears under. You will begin to spot biases. These are the kinds of stories they cover. And beyond that, you'll also begin to see how they manipulate the information that they're providing. And then, the other piece of that is looking at different sources and making sure that you're looking at a myriad of sources so that you're not getting just one perspective on something.
All right. Well, the next question that I have is, how has misinformation affected you both professionally and personally?
Well, professional was easy, with journalism. We have seen the rise of, quite frankly, blatant misinformation, manipulation of information as well as misinformation. And so um, for journalists in particular, they're very frustrated by what they think of as pseudo journalism, maybe, or advocacy journalism. There is a particular right wing organization here in the state of Oklahoma that produces something they call news, which is absolutely not news. And one of my former colleagues from the Oklahoman works there. And it frustrates me when I see coverage under his byline where I was in a committee meeting or some other event at the Capitol, and only about a quarter of what is being covered by that news is actually what went on. And it's very clearly cherry picking in the name of disinformation about a particular topic. So, and then that hurts all of us at the Capitol as people are trying to make choices about things they don't know what to believe.
So you kind of touched on it there, but do you see misinformation and disinformation becoming more common and becoming a bigger deal than it currently is?
Yes, there's a variety of reasons for that, not the least of which is you have tools today that make it very easy to do things like deep fakes. So we could take this video that the three of us are on right now and manipulate it through deep fakes and have us saying anything or doing all kinds of ridiculous things. And that kind of disinformation is going to be a real problem for the tail end of my generation and especially your generation growing up. The problem is compounded by folks who have grown up learning to trust whatever they see. And some of that, I think, comes from the kind of testing that we do in schools today, where we teach kids that all they need to do is look for the word that fits in the space. And they're not really thinking about what it is they're doing. They're just looking for something that kind of satisfies, I need something that goes in here. And I was given a paragraph. So I look through the paragraph, I find the two words or whatever it is that goes in that space. And they've gotten used to that kind of feeding and believe that that's actually doing either research or somehow informing themselves. And the reality is that's where misinformation comes in so easily. And it's not just, frankly, I think it started with my generation, and I'm a product of the early 1980s schooling, and we saw the rise of standardized testing at that point, and it's just gotten progressively worse. You also see folks who are my generation who grew up watching the news and trusting, and they maintain that trust today when they probably shouldn't. And And your generation probably sees that so much better than my generation does. It's like, how can they believe that? Can't they tell that's manipulated? So you guys see that, but I think my generation maybe does a little better job of on the side of the fill in the blanks kind of thing. So, you guys familiar with Mad Libs? Yeah. We used to do those on car trips when I was a kid. The idea is a book of stories where they leave out words and then they tell you the kind of word that you have to put in. And so much testing today feels like Mad Libs, where I'm just looking for the thing that kind of makes it make sense. And I have a friend, and yes, we're friends, but I worry about them because they spend a lot of time doing research, and the kind of research they're doing is not productive. And I've asked them before, as we've been having conversations, what makes you believe this person? I mean, my friend was telling me that President Biden is not the president of the United States. He's the president of just Washington, D.C., that Washington, D.C. is actually owned by the Vatican, and that Donald Trump is president of the rest of the United States. And I said, well, why do you think this? And well, they had found this research, and this guy who looked very credible, but was nobody, was standing out and presenting themselves in a very factual manner. And my friend really had no ability to kind of discern fact from fiction. It terrifies me.
Yeah, yeah. My next question, and you've already answered this, but if you want to go more into it, what are some of the harmful effects of disinformation that you've seen?
People are making choices, and this may be historic. It may not just be now, but people are making choices about who represents them based off of things that aren't meaningful. And I have a very clear example of that. So in 2018, when I was running for office, there was a race for labor commissioner in the state of Oklahoma. And in the course of that race, we got mail at the house from one of the candidates who talked about how they were pro-life and how important it was to be pro-life. And I leaned over to my wife and I said, this person has no idea what kind of labor they're going to be involved with if they believe this is important. But the reality is, when people are faced with all of these kinds of competing facts, and again, I'm using air quotes, in terms of information and disinformation, misinformation, they look to things as virtue signaling, maybe is the right word. And so and to me, this is a lot of what political messaging is today. When you get that flyer at your house and it's got 4 bullet points on there, right? That's designed to build trust in people. It's like, oh, I believe in that. I believe in that. I believe in that. This person must think like I do. And so they're going to make good decisions like I would make those same kinds of decisions. And the reality is so far from the truth. It's those times when politicians abuse the people and do things that are, frankly, not in the best interest of the people that they're supposed to be representing, and they get away with it because people know that they support this and they support this, and so do I, and so that means they're good people. No, they're not necessarily, and I'm painting with a broad brush because I will tell you that I am blessed to serve with so many people that I do think of as good people. The challenge is that people don't necessarily understand what we do, and don't understand, or they don't have a depth in all the various issues. And so they look for these kind of little virtue signaling things to say, yeah, I'm going to support this person. And to me, that's a real problem, especially in an age of disinformation. And so a good example of this is abortion. Right? Abortion has been illegal in the state of Oklahoma since 1911. Um, Most people don't realize that, but the Supreme Court changed how the law was interpreted in the state of Oklahoma with Roe v. Wade, and then again with the Dobbs decision reversing Roe v. Wade. But my colleagues continue to author bills about abortion in the state of Oklahoma. And you have to ask yourself, why? How much more illegal does it need to be? Right? Guns are the same way. We have constitutional carry in the state of Oklahoma, or what I call untrained carry, because anybody can just grab a gun and strut around with it. And yet we have probably 40 bills about firearms this session. For what point? I mean, how much more gun do we need? And but it's those kinds of things again. So I can put these bullet points on my flyer that I'm going to send out to people and tell them how hard I'm working for them. And the reality is they're not representing your best interests. When we look at Volkswagen, and Volkswagen says, hey, we're going to go to Canada because we like their higher tax structure, right? We like the fact, all these things that we think here in the state of Oklahoma are all of the things we're being told here in the state of Oklahoma are reasons for businesses to choose a state. Not it at all. Right? Volkswagen chose to go to Canada where they're going to pay higher taxes, but they're going to have a better environment for their company. They're going to have better educated employees. They're not going to have to worry about the high costs of insurance for medical care for their employees. They're not going to have to worry, frankly, about living in the Wild West and having everybody and their dog walking around armed to the teeth. The choices that we make because we allow people to get away with these 4 little bullet points for disinformation is not building in Oklahoma where businesses want to be.
So we kind of talked about disinformation as far as voters and the threat to them. When it comes to kids and teenagers and school and everything, what do you think the threat of disinformation is looking like for them?
Boy, that's a good question. Your generation is so intellectually curious. It's one of the things I admire, as well as having kind of a network reach that my generation never had. I saw a statistic that said your generation probably has roughly 50% of the people that they think of as close, are people they've never met in real life, oftentimes living in another state or in another country in the world. And that kind of purview is just, it's awesome. But in terms of misinformation, to me, the bigger challenge, well, there's 2 challenges. One is the rise of things like ChatGPT, where you get an answer back that's very nicely drafted or nicely presented that looks real, that may include false information. And your generation is very, very trusting about those kinds of things. And then it's the effects of misinformation on those. And you guys, I shouldn't paint with a broad brush because you guys are old enough. You're making your own decisions now at the ballot box, et cetera. But it's my generation that shows up a lot more at the ballot box than yours does. And misinformation is causing us to make all kinds of bad decisions that affect you. And those kids that are much younger, because I think that was really where your thrust of your question was. So. Can I give you an example of that?
Sure.
So the outcomes we talk about in our classrooms, we, through misinformation, paint classrooms as these lawless places filled with pornography and teaching kids about how awful the United States is. And the reality is so far from the truth. I keep telling my colleagues, why don't you actually go to a school? Go talk to teachers, go sit in classrooms, listen, talk to the kids. You're going to find something that is so far different um, than what is being portrayed. And we have probably the worst person leading the charge right now in our new superintendent of public instruction here in the state of Oklahoma, who continues to say these outlandish things about trying to paint a picture of classrooms that is just so far from the truth. It's ridiculous. If teachers were indoctrinating kids, they would indoctrinate kids to go home and do their homework, right? They would be indoctrinating their kids to sit in class and be respectful. They would indoctrinate kids to stay off of their cell phones. They would indoctrinate their kids to have a vocabulary that extends past four-letter words. They're not indoctrinating kids. They're struggling to make things work with kids, frankly, that we're sending to classrooms. So many of them are struggling at home with things that are happening outside the classroom. So, that's a form of disinformation that's prevalent at the Capitol.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, some of the things I hear, I'm like, where did you see that? I never have seen anything like that.
Show me a kid that is surfing a school
Yeah.
library for porn.
Yeah, like no one does that.
No. They all have these,
Yeah.
right? You can't see it, but it's blurred out, but it's a cell phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have all the porn they want at their fingertips. Why would they go through the awkwardness of cruising through finding that one book that has porn or what, it's outlandish.
Yeah, it is. It is. My next question is for someone who watches the news maybe on a daily or weekly basis, what would be the best way for them to separate like fact versus fiction or biased versus non-biased?
Multiple sources. Multiple sources that show you vastly different perspectives on issues that are happening. So if you're a big, fan of MSNBC, temper it with some Fox News. I spend a lot of time with CNN and Politico, and to me, I get relevant information there, and then I temper it with MSNBC and Fox News, and I take advantage of my cell phone, and I pay for Apple News so that I have access to a variety of different sources of information. And then I'll read 3 or 4 different stories on the same particular issue. It's harder to do with local content, especially television news, because they're all kind of, they don't have the resources they used to, and so they're all basically putting the same stories out, at least in terms of community coverage. I will give props to the Capitol Press Corps. We have some folks that are really trying to do some good journalism out there, and so delighted to see some of the work that they do. And they do look for different angles on stories, the TV and the print media. The challenge we have, I think, in the Capitol Press Corps is that so many of them are new. You don't have folks who've been there 30 years covering issues who know exactly which question to ask. So it's like term limits for journalists.
In your time in public office, so you said you were elected in 2018, has misinformation like tampered down when it comes to like blatant fabrication, or like in other words, has misinformation towards you increased, decreased, throughout the years?
It's been pretty constant. It is easy to cherry pick what somebody says and present it without context, and that's so prevalent. Happens to all of us at the Capitol. It doesn't matter which side of any issue that you happen to be on. We do have an advantage at the Capitol that a lot of the stuff we're doing is being covered in video. And so you can go back and you can actually look at the video yourself and say, oh, that's not what he said. Or, oh my God, they also said this. And I think about the debate we had on the floor this week about discipline for special needs kids. And it's just jaw dropping. These folks who justify beating kids who, yeah. Tell me why it is you want to beat a kid with intellectual disabilities, sparing the rod and spoiling the child. This is a child who is, maybe 70 IQ, and yeah, they're acting out. Beating him isn't going to change anything. But there are folks who believe absolutely that's what you ought to be doing.
Well, that was our last question. So if you have anything else at all that you would like to add, you could definitely go ahead, but I don't think we have any more questions.
My encouragement to everybody is something I said a little earlier. Challenge yourself by reading different things or watching different things on a particular issue. Ask yourself, why do I trust whatever it is I'm seeing? So it was on a Telegram channel, and so there's 6,000 people in this Telegram channel, but what makes that credible? In an era where, we had a bill that was on the floor not this week, but last week, where one of my colleagues cited the American College of Pediatricians and used it as a credible source. Well, this is not the American Academy of Pediatricians. It's an AstroTurf organization of about 500 pediatricians out of the tens of thousands here in the United States. That is a fringe group, and my colleague didn't know. They accepted it as a credible source. So research, take a look at what you're looking at, and ask, why should I trust it? And yeah, my wife's in the other room. She said, Facebook is not research.
True, very true.
So, what advice do you guys have for us?
Well, I would say what your wife said about Facebook, because I know so many people, maybe older people, who that's their only source. They don't even check what source the article is. They just see it on Facebook and they decide that's true or that's, I don't know. So my advice would be to use the sources and, see who the author is, all of those things. I can only hope.
As a technology guy, part of the challenge that we face today is from the algorithm, right? With air quotes. But when I was growing up, print journalism was still very, very strong. And one of the nice things about a newspaper is that you would be reading a story and then there would be something adjacent to it. And you would have this serendipity moment where you're going to consume something that you otherwise would not have just because of its adjacency. And today, algorithmically, our feeds are filled with stuff that just reinforces whatever it is we're looking at, whether it's true or not. Technology guy, we need to fix that.
I think another thing is consuming a diverse pool of news. So like you mentioned earlier, it's really important to diversify your sources and your news sources. Everything that's really important.
Can I give shout outs to some great journalism going on here in Oklahoma? The Frontier, so readfrontier.org, I think is the URL. Non-Doc Media, Oklahoma Watch, and I'm probably missing a few others that people will get mad at me about because folks are doing great stuff. And the Tulsa World and the Oklahoman both doing good things. CNHI Media, Janelle Stickline is at the Capitol on a regular basis and does terrific work covering issues that affect small communities in the state of Oklahoma. So, and then your television stations, are again trying to maintain good presence out at the Capitol. Oklahoma Policy too. If you're looking for, now I will tell you, Oklahoma Policy does have a liberal bias, but the information they provide is very factual. Their bias shows in the kinds of things they cover. So, but that's an excellent source as well.
Thank you for those.
Oh, and the Oklahoma Observer.
Yes, definitely. Well, Lauren?
I do not have any more questions. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. Your insight was great.
Thank you. Y'all take care. I hope to see you at the Capitol sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.